Hello everyone, Jay Warden here, and welcome to my recap and review of the episode When the Bough Breaks. A reasonably interesting episode with a bunch of kids in it that surprisingly aren't too annoying. Don't forget those spoilers, otherwise, enjoy. The Enterprise is investigating some faint energy readings in a system that is reputably the location of the mythical world of Aldea. After having a literal run-in with one of the kids on board, Riker is summoned to the bridge to excitedly explain the legend to the rest of us. They were apparently a super advanced and sophisticated race to the point where they could simply devote their lives to the pursuits of various arts, and had managed to hide their entire planet so they wouldn't be disturbed. Although their sensors can't find anything, Troy insists there's definitely something out there, and after a bit more probing, a planet finally decloaks in front of them. After being scanned, Picard gives them a call, and once again we're treated to a completely human-looking alien who introduces herself as Rochella. She welcomes them, confirming this is indeed the legendary planet Aldea. Picard is impressed at finding out the legends to be true, but wants to know why they revealed themselves. Rochella says she's happy to meet in person to discuss their reasons and other subjects of mutual interest. So Picard says go for it, and then almost immediately Rochella and another chap beam onto the bridge, startling everyone. He introduces himself as Radu, the leader of Aldea, and explains that they'll have to use their superior beaming technology as the Enterprises won't work through their shield, before inviting them down to the surface for a meeting. They seem to be having trouble with the bright lights on the ship though, and say they'll have to return to the planet now, but look forward to Riker's arrival when they're waiting very shortly, and then promptly leave. Picard invites comment, and Troy warns that she senses they badly want something from the crew, so much that they're afraid it'll be turned down. Radu then calls again and tells Riker they're ready for him and two others before promptly beaming him, Troy and Dr. Beverly down without so much as a courtesy. However, afterwards the ship gets an intense probing from a beam of light, and it seems very interested in Wesley and the other children on board. On the surface, Radu is explaining some history of Aldea before coming to the topic of why they invited them down. It seems the population of Aldea is dwindling rapidly and are now at a point where they can't even have their own children, so want the Federation's help in providing them with children so they can teach a new generation their way of life. And when we say providing, they mean right now in exchange for some cool technology. Riker flat out refuses, so Radu sends him back to the ship and immediately kidnaps Wesley and a few of the other kids off the ship. Radu then calls Picard and promises no harm will come to them and is prepared to offer compensation. Picard though is fucking furious and demands the kids be returned at once, but Radu is a complete twat and acting as if he's done nothing wrong, says he'll call him again when Picard calms down. Back on the planet, Wesley tries to reassure the other kids that everything will be okay when the Aldeans come in to welcome them to their new home, and then say they can have anything they want, except being allowed to go home of course. Radu explains that their custodian chose them because they're special kids who have various unique talents, and insists this is their new home now and to simply enjoy it. In the conference room, Picard and Dr. Beverly are trying to reassure the parents of the kidnapped children that they're doing everything they can to secure the release of the kids, but to be patient and promises the Enterprise will not leave orbit until they're returned. Meanwhile, Radu explains that they're being assigned to units, foster parents essentially, with similar talents so that each child may reach the full potential of their own gifts. Wesley continues to protest, but Radu simply brushes him off like the uncaring twat that he is. One of the kids, Harry, is led away by a pair of artists, while another, Katie, is given to a creepy looking old man who is one of their foremost musicians. Both kids look a little scared but are reassured by their new guardians that there's nothing to fear and all will be well, which just leaves Wesley. He isn't all that pleased, and Radu just tells him to shut up, accept his new fate, and tells him that there's nothing he or anyone else on the ship can do to change this. Rochella though is having fun with a tiny adorable looking ginger kid, Alexandra, and says she'll never let her go even though she's intended for another foster unit. Back on the ship, Data says he may have found a small weakness in the shield protecting the planet, so Picard tasks Riker and LaForge to see if they can find a way to exploit this weakness so they can beam the kids back. Back on the planet, another Aldean called Joanna takes Wesley to meet the custodian, which is basically just an AI intelligence. She logs him in as a registered user and then he starts bombarding her with questions about it. She explains that the custodian basically provides all of their needs and has taken care of them for countless centuries now so they can go about their business of making art and music, but refuses to answer any of his more technical questions and doesn't really seem to have a clue how their own technology even works anymore. Picard meanwhile has managed to arrange a new meeting with Radu on the planet and tries to insist on seeing the kids first, but Radu continues to make us hate him even more and says he's not here to pander to their silly emotions, but to negotiate for compensation. Rochella tries to assure them again that the kids will be well taken care of and that they'll eventually begin a new generation of Aldeans. Dr. Beverly asks how they can be so sure they won't be affected by the same problems, but Radu thinks it's simply a genetic issue, and thus using outsiders mean they can get around the problem. Picard repeats his demand about seeing the kids before negotiating further, so Radu finally relents, allowing Dr. Beverly to briefly reunite with Wesley, where they proceed to do some terrible pretend acting to cover up her attempts to perform a medical scan on Joanna, and then reports back to Picard before Radu sends them back to the ship. Radu though wants them to understand just how puny they are, so punches the Enterprise so hard it will take them 3 days to return to the planet. So 3 days later they arrive back. Picard calls Radu, tells him he thinks there's still some room for negotiation, and is told he'll be beamed down shortly before demanding Data find some way to get through their shield with their own transporters. Dr. Beverly then briefs Picard on her medical scans of Duana earlier and explains that some nasty DNA damage has caused their sterility as well as their sensitivity to bright lights, and though still not certain yet, suspects it may be a result of long-term radiation exposure. Meanwhile, all the kids are starting to feel sad and really just want to go home now to their real parents, while Wesley tells Duana and Radu that he'll no longer cooperate with them. So he rouses the other kids together and organises them into a passive-aggressive resistance force, refusing to do anything the Aldeans want of them. Back on the bridge, Dr. Beverly confirms to Picard that the Aldeans are suffering from radiation poisoning and that it should be reversible, whilst Data and the Forge report that they found a weakness in their shield that will finally allow them to beam down. So he gets Riker and Data to beam down and disable their power source, whilst Picard will buy them the time they need by stalling the Aldeans. As Radu takes Picard and Dr. Beverly, Riker and Data beam down separately at the same time and quickly find the Custodian. Radu tells Picard he needs to talk to the kids to stop their little strike because he's not very good with kids. Picard says he'll see what he can do, has a quick chat, an awkward hug with Alexandra, and then brings them back with him to explain that they really need to go home now. Radu continues to be an utter twat even as Dr. Beverly tries to explain how it's the radiation that's been causing the problems, and if the kids stay they'll end up suffering the same fate, and even Rochella joins in to question Radu, but he still refuses and tries to send Picard and Dr. Beverly back to the ship. Thankfully though, Riker and Data found the Custodian and managed to disable it so their technology is now useless and the shield is finally down. As the kids are beamed back up to the ship, Radu laments that Picard has essentially doomed his race, but he reassures him that they'll do everything they can to help restore their people to health, and to help them relearn how to use their own technology. Once back on the ship, we hear that everything's been fixed, the Aldeans will be just fine, and Picard gets another awkward hug from Alexandra, much to the amusement of everyone else. You know, for an episode which has several young children in it, especially ones that have to speak, this really wasn't as bad as I expected it to be. Child actors are, more often than not, generally annoying and awkward to watch, which is not really any of their fault given their age and inexperience, but it's just something I've never really cared for much. Maybe I'm just haunted by the performance of a young Anakin Skywalker from The Phantom Menace. In any case, here it's generally okay. Philip Waller, who plays Harry, did a decent job for someone his age, and I have to admit I even found Alexandra adorable, though you can clearly see her attention wandering during some scenes. As a side note, I found some interesting trivia that Alexandra was played by twins, simply alternating one actress for the other between scenes. The weakest child actor here by far was Jandy Swanson, who plays Katie, but thankfully she only gets a small number of lines. In any case, this episode is a nice reminder that the Enterprise is a family ship and children are part of the dynamic of the crew now, even though I still question how smart that is given how dangerous exploring space can be. And as for Wesley, he too was perfectly fine, even good in this episode, and did an admirable and effective job of organising the other kids into passively resisting the efforts of the Aldeans to integrate them. Neither does he save the day at the last minute, which kind of surprised me because it seemed the episode might be leaning that way when he figured out how the Custodian worked. I thought he might end up using his genius knowledge to either circumvent or outsmart the computer into doing what he wanted, disabling the Aldeans' ability to use their technology and allowing the ship to beam them back up. It could have very easily gone that way, and he even says to Picard towards the conclusion he thinks he's figured it all out. But at the end of the day, none of this was actually used to save them, merely instead I think being used to show us how the Aldeans have long since forgotten how their own technology works anymore. It's just nice to see him used more sensibly rather than the Wonder Child save-the-day genius making the adults look shit at their jobs, and overall I think Will Wheaton does a pretty good job here. Overall, as far as Season 1 episodes go, it's not nearly as messy or badly written as many of its preceding episodes. It's generally a quite coherent, reasonably interesting episode with some interesting concepts, though I do have some issues with it. My biggest one is the Aldeans' overall strategy here being untenable. Okay, they want to repopulate their society with a new generation given they can no longer have children themselves due to sterility. That's fair enough, I can understand that. But how do they expect to do this with only 7 children? Genetic diversity issues aside, I'm afraid you're going to need a lot more than that to really revive a population, I think. Also, I think this brings up uncomfortable questions of their intentions for the future newborns given the disparate ages of the various children kidnapped here. Are they intending to force them to pair off when they reach an appropriate age or to become baby factories for the Aldeans? I understand the custodian chose these kids based on their latent artistic talents, but if you're facing a population crisis, I feel you need to widen your criteria a bit to rebuild a society. Simply being a culture of artists when you need fresh ideas, ingenuity, and practical skills to revitalise your population isn't going to cut it. Also, I just don't really buy the Aldeans' total ignorance of their obviously dire situation. I can understand being so dependent on your technology for centuries, you've forgotten how it works, but are you really telling me looking out the window of your planet, seeing everything dying and your own population dwindling, that you wouldn't even try to question what's going on or do some investigative work? For that matter, why doesn't the custodian figure this all out and try to warn the Aldeans of the situation? I mean, it seems like a pretty smart AI, and with such advanced technology you'd think it would be easily able to detect the damage to their ozone layer, the resulting radiation damage, and even be able to fix that problem. I mean, these guys have the power to cloak their entire planet, beam wherever they like, and punt starships away like it's nothing. Also, that little scene where Dr. Crusher and Wesley do some hammy pretend acting is rather cringeworthy. I mean, Wesley is so bad at hiding what he's doing, it's beyond belief that Duana wouldn't notice it and ask what he's doing. If they're really this ignorant and blind to their situation, then they honestly deserve to die out due to their stupidity. I guess so the writers were going for a theme of this episode regarding the danger of having a depleted ozone layer, something that was a very real danger and worry back in the 80s when gaping holes were discovered due to human activities, and is slowly repairing itself today thanks to the worldwide banning of those chemicals which actively caused the damage in the first place. The episode is not too on the nose about this though, simply being a background theme rather than taking centre stage. The Aldeans themselves are portrayed as a generally friendly and caring people, at least in their interactions with the children, but their attitudes to the rest of the crew are lacking in any real empathy, though I do understand they're probably desperate enough to save their own society by stealing children from others, so you tend to swing between sympathy for their situation and then contempt at their methods. The real standout here is Radu, played by Jerry Hardin. This guy is just dripping with utter condescension and disdain for the crew's concerns and seems completely oblivious as to why they feel so strongly about their children being kidnapped. And the actor does it so well, I genuinely hated the guy and wanted him to have his comeuppance, so I enjoyed it when he finally realised his technology didn't work anymore. However, that's very short-lived because he immediately changes into being a cooperative, understanding and quite happy to have help from the crew at the very end of the show. Like most Season 1 episodes, the ending is rather abrupt, with the crew having magically fixed all their immediate problems off-screen within the last 30 seconds. Crusher fixes their sterility problems, and Data completely repairs their ozone layer, and everyone's happy before we get a cutesy moment at the end. It's very TOS really, when the crew saves the day and has a light-hearted moment to end the episode on, and it can be quite irritating sometimes, though in this case I will admit I do enjoy seeing Picard's discomfort dealing with children. Speaking of Picard, he does shine in this episode, especially with his early fury towards Radu at his actions, reassuring the parents of the kidnapped children and then managing to play the diplomatic game long enough for them to find a solution to disable their technology. So overall, a coherent, semi-decent episode, for Season 1 anyway, and that's always welcome. It's not a memorable one by any means, and there's little really to take away from it aside from its environmental message, but generally I think this is quite a watchable episode. Next time, the crew visit a terraforming station and encounter a brand new form of life in the episode Home Soil. Please feel free to leave any comments or feedback, and if you liked this episode then please do like, subscribe and share. This has been Jay Warden, signing off.